"I'm sorry to be late," she apologized breathlessly as Nancy advanced to meet her. "But the nurse who was to relieve me didn't come on time." Nancy and her father liked Miss Foster at once. She was a woman of early middle age, brisk and efficient, with a friendly smile. "Mr. Drew, you said over the telephone that you and your daughter wanted to ask me about a former patient of mine," she began at once. "I'll be glad to answer any questions I can." "As I explained, we're seeking information about a certain Flossie Johnson." The young woman also used the name of Floriana, said the lawyer. "I never took care of anyone who called herself by either of those names. The patient you asked me about, a beautiful young woman injured in an automobile accident about 10 years ago, gave us her name as Miss Flower." "Tell us about her," Mr. Drew urged. "From the facts we've already gathered, it seems fairly evident that she is the one for whom we're looking." "She was a hospital case assigned to me about 10 years ago," Miss Foster recalled. "The girl interested me more than the average patient. She was so beautiful, so unassuming, and yet so distinguished. From the first, I felt that she had not registered under her real name." "What made you think so?" Mr. Drew inquired. "Mostly little remarks she dropped. One peculiar thing was that Miss Flower never had visitors. No messages came for her. There were no letters. She would allow the authorities to notify no one of the accident. 'I don't want anyone to know,' she would say. 'Not until I'm well.'" "The young woman believed she would recover completely?" Nancy asked quickly. "Only the first few weeks. Then the doctor told her the truth, that she would be a cripple for the rest of her life." "How did she take it?" Mr. Drew questioned. "Very hard. She wept for days, saying the strangest things. One remark I recall was, 'His little Cinderella will never dance for him again.' Oh, it was heartbreaking to listen to her. Cinderella." Nancy was so sure now she was on the right track that her mind leaped from one possibility to another. She nearly missed her father's next question. "Where did the girl go after she left the hospital?" "I never heard," Miss Foster admitted regretfully. "From Miss Flower's remarks, I assumed that she intended to retire to some secluded place near Hopewell." "Yet it's unlikely the woman had much money with her," Mr. Drew commented. "When she was picked up, I understand no purse was found." "That's true," said the nurse, "but she had some money in her possession, though she couldn't have had much left after she paid her hospital bill." "All these years she must have earned a living somehow," Nancy commented. "You have no idea how, of course?" "No, I haven't." "That name Flower," Nancy mused. "Floriana was deeply interested in gardening," she added, recalling what Mrs. Fenimore had told her about the dancer. "And so was Miss Flower," the nurse exclaimed. "She was always asking me to buy her garden magazines. Why, the day before her release, I remember she cut an advertisement from the local paper." "Yes?" Nancy asked eagerly as the nurse hesitated. "Probably it was no significance," Miss Foster completed. "But the advertisement Miss Flower clipped out offered a small fruit and vegetable farm for sale, a place known as Clover Farm." "Where is the farm?" Nancy asked, her eyes dancing with hope. "It seems to me there's a Clover Farm at Hilton, about 10 miles from here. I don't know whether it's the same one, though." Nancy turned to her father. "Yes, we'll go there today," he said, reading his daughter's thoughts. "It may be a vain chase, but something tells me that this time we'll find Floriana." Chapter 22. The Recluse of Clover Farm. After bidding Miss Foster goodbye, Nancy and her father drove directly to Hilton. Inquiry at the little village revealed that Clover Farm was well known and famous for its superb fruits and vegetables. Yet, strangely enough, no one could tell the Drews anything about the owner. "Fact is, folks hereabouts never lay eyes on Miss Flower," a filling station attendant explained to them. "She bought the place 10 years ago. To my knowledge, she's never set foot on off the farm since." "Then how does she market her products?" Mr. Drew asked. "Sends her farm hands to town with the vegetables. All her help has been with her for years. They're a loyal lot, and she's taught 'em to be close-mouthed." Mr. Drew inquired how to reach the farm. He was instructed to drive on for 2.5 miles before turning into a private side road. "You'll see a big sign reading Clover Farm, no visitors admitted," the filling station man added. "It means what it says, too." Convinced they were at last nearing the end of a long search, Nancy and her father drove on in high spirits. Presently they came to the sign the man had mentioned. A decorative wooden gate flanked by tall hedges barred admittance to the farm. With assurance, Mr. Drew opened the gate and drove up the winding lane. Nancy glimpsed a small white clapboard house surrounded by flower beds. There was an orchard and 2 large fields of vegetables. Suddenly 2 men in overalls leaped out from the roadside. Mr. Drew was forced to bring the car to a halt. "No visitors allowed here," one of the farmer said curtly. "Can you read signs?" "We came to see the owner of Clover Farm," Mr. Drew explained. "Our business with her is urgent." "Did Miss Flower send for you?" "No," Mr. Drew admitted, "but we have important information for Miss Flower." The workmen hesitated. Then one of them said impatiently, "Sorry, you can't see her." Disgusted, Mr. Drew was ready to go on to the house despite them. Nancy made a last, desperate attempt to gain their cooperation. "You'll be doing Miss Flower a favor if you'll let us talk to her," she pleaded. "You see, your employer has inherited a fortune, but she must claim it within the next few days or she'll lose it." The men's jaws dropped. "Is that the truth?" one of them demanded. "Certainly," snapped Mr. Drew. "Now will you tell Miss Flower we'd like to see her?" "She's not here." Nancy and her father were dumbfounded. "But we've been told Miss Flower never leaves Clover Farm," the girl protested. "She never did last night on account of being such a cripple, but when the government man came for her, she had to go. He took her away in a car." "What government man?" Mr. Drew asked quickly. "Did he give his name?" "He probably told Miss Flower. We didn't hear it. Fact is, we didn't see her go. She left a note." "Did she say why she had to go with him?" asked Nancy. "It was something about income tax. Miss Flower always thought she paid the government every penny she owed. She's as honest as the day is long. But the man claims she's made a false report and might have to go to prison." "This seems very irregular to me," commented Mr. Drew. "Assuming that Miss Flower made a mistake in the amount of her tax, she could not be sentenced without a hearing. The usual procedure would be to notify her by letter and have her call at the tax office to explain her side of the matter." "Dad," Nancy said, looking anxiously at him, "it looks as if someone was very eager to get Miss Flower away from here." "Before we found her, you mean?" "Yes. Oh, Dad, we must do something. First of all, we'll check with the revenue office. That is, if I can get to a telephone." The 2 farm hands, sensing that Nancy and her father were sincere, invited them into the farmhouse. Mr. Drew busied himself at the telephone while Nancy looked at the note Miss Flower had left. The writing showed such haste and nervousness she could not identify it as Floriana's. The telephone call required a few minutes. When the lawyer finished it, he looked grim. "Just as we feared," he revealed. "The Federal Bureau has no case pending against Miss Flower." "Then it was all a hoax." "Yes, the man who came here was an imposter. Obviously, it was a scheme to get her away from Clover Farm." The news of what had befallen the owner spread to Miss Flower's other 2 employees who were in the fields. They came in, their faces sad. The woman was loved and respected by them, and it was feared that she would suffer at the hands of her captor. "I wouldn't worry on that score," Mr. Drew said to comfort the men. "Miss Flower probably will receive good treatment, but unfortunately she will lose a fortune unless she can be found within a week." The farmhands looked to the Drews to do something about the matter. Nancy and her father promised to stop at the police station and report the kidnapping. The description the men of Clover Farm gave of the stranger was not very helpful. He was tall, slightly stooped, wore dark glasses, and had a beard. Probably a disguise, Nancy concluded. After telling their story to the local police, the Drews returned to the Hampton Hotel. Both Nancy and her father were discouraged, and still another surprise in the case awaited them. On his way to the dining room to luncheon, Carson Drew purchased a copy of the River Heights afternoon newspaper. A startling headline caught his eye. He gasped when he read it. "What is it?" Nancy cried. Her father thrust the paper before her, pointing to the item. "Famous dancer returns in time to claim Heath fortune." The story, which followed, stated that after a long search, Hector Keep had found the missing Floriana, who was now staying at the local Riverview Hotel. For many years, the famous dancer had been abroad, fulfilling professional engagements. "Then she isn't Miss Flower," said Nancy, her hopes tumbling. Floriana had married a South American dancer, Jose Fernandez, and had been difficult to trace because she had used her husband's name. Hector Keep was given high praise for having found the woman in time to prevent her from losing the Heath fortune. Nancy's discouragement lasted only a moment. Then her old suspicions returned. "This can't be true," she fairly wailed. "It must be a scheme to give the estate to an impostor, an accomplice of Mr. Keep's." "There's something underhanded about it," Mr. Drew agreed, looking grim. "Let's hurry back to River Heights and learn what we can," Nancy begged. Hastening through the meal, she and her father checked out of the hotel. They were convinced that Hector Keep had produced someone who resembled the missing Floriana. If he were able to establish her as the heiress, undoubtedly, he would pay her well and then take over the estate for himself. "Poor little Miss Flower," Nancy said sadly as the car sped along. "I'm sure she's Floriana. Oh, where have they hidden her?" It was late afternoon by the time the Drews reached River Heights. Mr. Drew said he had to stop at his office to attend some matters for a couple of hours, and that Nancy should take the car to do her investigating. "I believe I'll stop in to see Mrs. Fenimore and find out if she has heard the news," the girl decided, turning the automobile in the direction of the little cottage. The invalid and Joan were preparing supper when Nancy arrived. The child at once invited Nancy to eat with them, but the Drew girl shook her head, plunging at once into the subject uppermost in her mind. The Fenimores had not heard the exciting announcement. "My darling sister has been found," the widow cried, not realizing that the claimant might be an impostor. "Oh, why hasn't she come to see me? Please take me to her at once." All thought of supper was forgotten by the woman and her young daughter. Joan insisted upon going along to see her famous aunt. Hurriedly, they changed into their best clothes and rode with Nancy to the Riverview Hotel. "Madame Fernandez?" the clerk at the desk repeated when Nancy inquired for the woman. "I'll see if she's receiving callers. I believe she's having dinner in her room." While the little group waited, Mrs. Fenimore became so nervous she could hardly control herself. She began to feel faint, and Nancy brought her a glass of water. "I wonder if Floriana has changed much," she speculated, adjusting her hat for the 100th time. "Imagine her marrying a foreigner. Floriana always used to say she would never marry anyone except an American." 20 minutes elapsed. Then word was sent to the callers that they might go up to room 32. When they knocked a few minutes later, a voice said, "Come in." Floriana Fernandez was reclining on the bed, her back braced by several embroidered pillows. She wore an exotic negligee which set off to advantage her dark hair and creamy white skin. "Greetings, my dear sister," she said. As the three entered, she spoke in a stiff, affected way, as if English were difficult for her. "Vera, I'm so glad to see you again. This is so charming, child. She is Joan, of course, and this lovely senorita." Mrs. Fenimore was so confused that for an instant she could not speak. Joan clung to her mother. Nancy filled in the breach by giving her name. "Miss Drew." The dancer looked perplexed, but only for an instant. "Yes, I believe my dear friend Senor Keep tell me you are a friend of Vera." Turning to Mrs. Fenimore, she added, "Oh, I am so happy Senor Keep found me." "Floriana, you've changed," Mrs. Fenimore stammered. Going hesitantly to the bed, she would have kissed the dancer. The woman, however, drew back quickly, as if she dreaded an embrace. "I am a famous dancer now," Floriana said proudly, "and you should see my husband, one of the best dancers in South America. But it is hard work. We shall return to our home with much gold in our pockets and work no more." The meeting was going very badly indeed. Mrs. Fenimore was so stunned by the change in her sister that she could find nothing to say. Joan, too, merely opened her eyes wide and kept still. Nancy sought to keep the conversational ball rolling, for she was becoming more suspicious of the woman by the minute. "Suppose you tell us what you've been doing all these years," she encouraged the dancer. "I notice that English seems a bit difficult for you." "That is because I've lived so long in South America. For 10 years I speak almost no English, only Espanol." "Then you went there immediately after you gave up your career here?" "See, I eloped with darling husband." "But how could you desert Walter Heath?" Mrs. Fenimore murmured. "He was so good to you, so kind." "I could not marry Walt when I did not love him. No, to save him much hurt, I ran away." "And now you return to claim the Heath fortune?" Nancy interposed, disgusted. at such a procedure. Si, si, Senor keep tell me that I will be rich heiress.